This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and I just got a request to do a video on a Hamilton record player that I recently found. Someone else has one, and they want to know about upgrading the cartridge on this. Now, this particular example is in very nice shape. It's been well taken care of. It's not all scribbled on and banged up like most of these school record players are. And Hamilton made these for years, from the 1970s way on up to the 90s, maybe even later than that. This one's an 83 model. And it actually works, but of course it's going to get some preventative maintenance done to it. And we'll have a look at it here. Standard General Industries drive motor, metal static tone arm, volume and tone controls, power switch, pause control. The metal motor board is suspended on springs, and we have a front mounted 6x9 speaker. The amplifier is just a little cheap IC based amp. In fact, they use the same amplifier in the lower end Hamilton, the model 910, I believe. That's the one with the cheap plastic tone arm and the 4x10 inch speaker on the front. Well, what somebody wants to know is about the cartridge. This one uses the standard static 89T plug-in cartridge like most school record players used from the late 1950s up until close to the end and up until the mid-2000s anyway. But the problem is 89T cartridges are getting pricey and scarce, especially the older variety with the LP78 flip needle. Now, you can get the new fan steel versions, but your options are either an LP tip only or a 78 tip only, which means if you want to play both types of records, you have to buy two different types of cartridges and physically unplug one and plug another one in for playing the different types of records. And I don't like the red LP cartridges. Those don't track worth a darn, and they only pick up one channel of a stereo record, whereas this one will combine the left and right channels of a stereo record to give you a mono signal. I'm told that the black fan steel 911 D7s don't have that problem, but I've not ordered one yet to find out. So what we want to do is we want to replace the cartridge in this record player, and the same rule applies for the little cheaper Hamilton with the plastic arm. We want to replace this 89T cartridge with this fan steel P228D, which is a knockoff of the old Varco TN8. Don't say that on the package. And you can get these from the voiceofmusic.com, and I seriously doubt these were made in the USA. They were probably made in some foreign country and just packaged here. But this comes with your choice of either an LP78 flip needle or an LP flip needle, whatever you need. And the needle is user replaceable for under $10, unlike the plug-in 89T cartridge, where when the needle wears out on that, you're spending $20 to $30, maybe up to $40, depending on where you look, for a replacement plug-in cartridge needle assembly. And most of the 89T cartridges have a sapphire tipped LP needle. There are diamond tip ones. The 89TX, 81TX, and the Electro Voice 81D and 89D have diamond LP tips, but the majority of the ones that you find are sapphire, which has a much less life expectancy than a diamond tip. Now, back in the old days, you could buy these whole cartridges for like $5 and some change, and if that were the case today, we wouldn't be worried about none of this. But we want to put something in here that is cheap to maintain and is more gentle on records. Because another problem that 89Ts have is the rubber suspension inside the cartridge gets hard and the cantilever doesn't flex like it should, and that will cause skipping and undue wear to your records. But there are a few little issues we have to overcome when installing one of these cartridges. Number one, this is a true stereo cartridge, and the way you overcome that issue is you bridge the left and right channels together, as in left plus and right plus together, and left minus and right minus together. And I think this particular cartridge from the voiceofmusic.com, it comes with the jumper leads and the cartridge clips that you need, so that's a plus. Now the other obstacle, the hardest obstacle to get around, is the cartridge. The 89T puts out 1.3 volts. This cartridge here puts out 0.8 volts, and that's enough of a difference to cause weaker volume and weaker tone quality. Now on some record players it's harder to modify the amplifiers, but on these Hamiltons it's not really that difficult. You just have to modify the input components on the cartridge input to the amp, and once that's done right, this record player will have better fidelity and be more gentle on records than it ever was. Now another thing you need to do is adjust the tracking pressure in a digital scale. I got mine from Harbor Freight, I believe. Will do fine for that. Now the tracking pressure for an 89T cartridge is in the 6 to 8 gram range, although I've measured some that tracked as high as 10 to 12 grams, which is a little excessive, and even 6 to 8 is technically too much for a stereo record. I've read on some of the inner sleeves of older stereo records that 4 to 5 grams is the absolute maximum that you should play a stereo record. I'll show you something here regarding the tracking pressure. If you notice here, there's a spring and there's little notches there on the tone arm. Once you install the P228 cartridge, you will have to, and a small pair of needle nose pliers helps with this, just pull the spring off of this lower notch and raise it up a couple of notches and check your tracking pressure. If you can get it between 4 and 6 grams, that's what you're looking for. And regarding the model with the plastic arm, adjusting the tracking pressure is a little more tedious because the spring is not adjustable. You'll actually have to remove the spring and physically remove links from it. It's a trial and error process until you get the weight right. You don't want to take off too much. Now here's what it sounds like with the original cartridge. Got plenty of volume, but there's just no bass. It's just rather tinny sounding, and I think a lot of that is partly due to the components that they have across the cartridge input, which we'll talk about some in a minute. Alright, I got the record player standing up on its back. Hopefully it won't tip over. First thing we need to do is get the original cartridge out, so we'll unscrew the tone arm and gently pull it backwards. Now as you can see, the cartridge is held in by 2 screws, and there are 2 wires that solder to the cartridge holder. The red one is of course positive. I'm going to save this holder because I often need these for various projects, especially 1-tube wonders and 78 RPM record players. And I'm going to save this 89T cartridge. I actually have a 1-tube wonder that needs one right now, so we'll just put that in there. Okay, old cartridge is out. I left one of the screws in loose so I can slip the new cartridge mounting bracket under this screw and then I'll take the other screw and just simply screw it down on this side, and then our cartridge mounting bracket will be in place. And if you're wondering why I'm going into such detail, I'm assuming that the person who needs to know this may be a newbie. I don't know how much they know about these things, so I'm trying to cover all the bases here. Here's our bracket installed with the portion with the notch going towards the hole in it going towards the rear of the tone arm. Now we need to wire all this up, wire left and right together. Now this cartridge from the VM website comes with 4 clips that you can solder wires to, and it also comes with these little short lengths of tone arm wire with clips already attached to the ends. That's what you're technically supposed to use for jumping the left and right channels together. Now when preparing your clips to solder to, it's helpful to have an old dud cartridge on hand that you can slide the cartridge connector clips over while you prepare them to be installed on the new cartridge. One thing you want to remember is never, ever, ever apply heat to the terminals of the cartridge, even though I've done it before, but it's not a good idea. Whether the heat be directly to the terminals or to connecting pins on the terminals, it's just not a good idea, because if too much heat gets transferred up into the cartridge, it'll ruin it. And I'll give you another tip. If you use these jumper wires, the clips are not actually soldered onto the wires. They're just crimped in place, and they will very easily come off. So what I like to do is slide the wire that I'm working on, clip that I'm working on, onto a dud cartridge, and then actually solder the wire to the clip while it's still crimped on. Don't use too much solder. Don't solder the cartridge clip onto your cartridge terminal. And then once the wire is actually soldered to the cartridge clip, not just crimped on, I like to then take a little small piece of heat shrink tubing and run over the clip and shrink it down. And then after that, I can safely strip back the insulation off of these wires and not have to worry about the wire coming dislodged from the cartridge clip. And when sliding your clips over the new cartridge terminals, unfortunately these pins or terminals are not often formed properly, and it can be very difficult to get the new clips over the terminals. That's the harsh reality today. We're not dealing with the good old American-made ones anymore. We're dealing with whatever we get from China or Mexico or wherever. It's just the way it is. We have to deal with it. And this dud cartridge has the advantage that it tilts back, so when I put solder on this, the solder, the force of gravity will help pull the solder back and not let it go up into our cartridge connection and solder the cartridge terminal to the cartridge connector. Alright, our negative terminals are the two that space closest together, and I already have those bridged. And when you're doing this, it's important that your soldering iron is in good condition. And this is what I use. Something like a 60-watt iron should be sufficient. Make sure your tip is good and clean, and when you're soldering, take as least amount of time as possible doing it. Okay, there's our plush jumpers made up, and I'm going to put a little piece of heat shrink over that to give it some stability and to keep it from shorting out to the metal tone arm. Okay, there's that, and I think I'm also going to run a little piece of heat shrink over each cartridge pin just in case the connectors, the pins on the cartridge start to move. I don't want them making contact with the negative pin and shorting out. And they have been known to move before. Like I've already said, these are not to the quality standards of the good old American-made cartridge. I've never had one not work, but the quality control just ain't there anymore. Alright, I have it in here, and one of my pieces of heat shrink fell off just as I was sliding this terminal on, but it seems to be pretty rigid, so I don't think it's going to touch anything. Now let's turn it on, and unless something broke up in here, we should be able to pass audio. And then once we determine we can pass a signal, then we'll do what has to be done to the amplifier to make this cartridge work its best. Alright, it plays. It's about as tinny as it was, not as much volume, and it sounds like the speaker has a dragging voice coil.
And I forget my sorrow. I could leave the past behind, forget a love that once was mine. I could buy my peace of mind if I had one more dime.
But the tonal quality already is a little better than what it was. Here we are apart. All you have to do on this model is remove a screw from each side and then lift the motor board off, and be careful not to lose these 4 suspension springs. They're easy to lose. And here's the amplifier. As you can see, not much to it. It's based on a single IC chip for the audio amplifier. And here are the 2 components that are across the cartridge input that are of most interest to me. Now, measuring across the cartridge input, I'm reading 83 k ohms, and that's the reason we don't have a lot of bass, because these ceramic cartridges, they want to see a high input impedance, and this low value resistor that they have across here, and I know why they did it, because these record players were primarily meant for playing voice records. So, you know, with this low value resistor across the cartridge terminals, it just cuts the bass. So I want to change that to at least a 470K, maybe even a 1 meg, but we'll try a 470 and see what it sounds like. In this capacitor, I can't remember whether it's a 0.001 or a 0.01, but we may need to lower the value of that some. This resistor is actually 100K, but with other circuit components in the way, it was causing it to read 82 or whatever it was. So, but I still think that's kind of low. I'd like to go with at least 470. Alright, that helped considerably. That speaker definitely sounds like it has a dragging voice coil, but the camera's almost out of memory and it's getting late, so we will check that out at a later date. Yep, it's dragging, so this will be another one that'll go in the pile that I'm accumulating for Speaker Freak 95. Well, as it happens, I have another Hamilton record player, the 1988 version of this one, and it's in worse shape than this one. I'm going to fix it one day, but right now it became a organ donor for a 6x9 speaker to put in this one, so that took care of the rubbing voice coil problem. And then I modified the values of some components here. This is what we did. This resistor directly behind the cartridge connectors formerly was a 100K ohm. I replaced it with a 470K ohm. The disc capacitor that was behind the resistor was a 0.002 microfarad. I deleted it completely from the circuit, and that gets it loud enough to where it's usable. Now this resistor here, I could make that a lower value and probably get some more volume out of it, but as it is, I'm really pushing the limits of this amplifier. We have to remember this is not a Caliphone or a Newcomb or an Audiotronics with a 5 or 10 watt amplifier in it. This is a lower end IC based amp that's good for maybe 2 watts at the most, and it's not going to have the bold sound that the more well-known brands have, but it now sounds better than it did. And I kind of like these record players because, you know, once they're modified, they do pretty good and they're easy to service. If this IC ever goes bad, it just plugs in. I've only had one go bad, and that was my fault. I tried to connect one of these record players to a little to a little AM transmitter that was a hot chassis job and wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, and I fried the audio output IC, but it was no big deal. I just ordered a pack of 5 of them off of eBay for a few bucks and popped the old one out and popped another one in, and we were good to go. And not that I really needed to do it, but just to make y'all feel all warm and toasty inside, I replaced the 4 electrolytic capacitors on the circuit board, the 3 470s and a 4.7. The 470s all read about 100 microfarads higher than normal. And I replaced them with new Panasonic capacitors. I probably won't be able to tell a bit of difference in performance, but you know how people are. You know, the thought of new capacitors in their equipment just turns them on, so there you go. Even though this drive mechanism works, we're still going to take it apart and clean it and lubricate it. You can see right here some dried grease on the right here. Yeah, that needs to be. I'm not going to film that. You've seen me do it 100 times. But this is about to get taken apart and cleaned and lubricated, and then it'll be like new again. Okay, we have the mechanism and the motor cleaned and lubricated. I did not replace the motor mounts. They're still perfectly fine. So we left those in place, but the motor and everything has been cleaned and lubricated, and it should be good to go for a number of years. And even on 16, this has got good torque. I'm pressing up against it pretty hard, and it's not slowing it down that much. So that's a sign of a healthy drive mechanism. That's the pause control. It's working like it should. Alright, I moved the spring up a couple of notches to lighten the pressure a little bit. And right now I don't have any 78s or 16s down here, but I know it works and you do too, so I'm not going to run back up to the house and grab any such records just to finish this off. You know it works. So with that said, we'll see another job completed and more to come later.